thank you for jumping on this webinar. Get started. Just a quick introduction for me. I'm Josh. I head up the marketing with BW Fusion, and just from our side, from the BW Fusion family side of it, just appreciate you guys taking an hour out of your schedule to be a part of this. I think that we have some really good things to share with you guys, and we'll get going. So, a little bit about BW Fusion for those of you guys don't know. So we've been around since 2019, but we're backed by over 30 years of research and data. And one of the things that I always like to talk about is the profitability side of it. And everybody in the industry, especially on the crop nutrition side of it, is profitability, right? I look through the magazines, I see stuff on social, and it's like, hey, we can improve your profitability, or we're increasing your ROI. We're saying the same thing, right? We're a part of that little group. But the biggest difference between us is we lead with education. And with that education comes facts, comes data, comes innovation. And that's who BW Fusion is, the educational company with facts, data, and innovation. And with that innovation and with that growth comes your profitability. And so we're going to talk to you a little bit about that. I want to introduce kind of our panel today with one of our leading agronomists, Jason Sly and Devin Baker. And I'm excited to kind of share what they're going to bring with you to help you make some decisions into this fall and in improving your 2024 fertility program. So Jason, take it away.
Hi guys, welcome. Glad you're on here this morning. Really my goal with this presentation is to truly simplify basically the system that nature likes. If we can simplify the system and allow our biology to do some of the work for us, it makes our crop grow easier with less moisture, with less nutrition. And I really want to just walk you through some of the key concepts that we look for in a soil test, or what we're trying to basically change in your soils to allow you to see more, productivity and profitability. Yeah, Josh, for some reason it went back to you, I think, because it's not allowing me to click through. There we go. Thanks. All right, perfect. So I put on a title here, What Drives Yield? This is just a biomass picture. Actually, this is one of my home farms here. It's just a half mile north of my house. I've been watching this here for about 4 or 5 weeks. And you notice, I'm sure everybody's aware of this, right? It's just looking at biomass, NDVI, looking at plant health, okay? And I noticed this line here on the far left side start to stand out when we hit stress. And I'll explain a little bit about our weather. We started off extremely dry, like I know a lot of you did. And needless to say, we started hooking some rains here in mid-July. Ultimately, we don't have a lot of a crop here as far as a corn crop. We do just outside of my area, but not right here in my area. And what's unique is this spot here is stayed green while the rest of this field is falling apart. And so as an agronomist, the first thing you do, right, is you go look at what is different about that land. Now, obviously, I know what's different, but I just started throwing some ideas out there, right? I threw elevation out there. I looked at the organic matter maps. I looked at the soil type maps. And in reality, nothing matches up to that line. So then what I did is I had one of our agronomists go out and pull some soil tests and some tissue tests, and I'm going to share some of that with you. But ultimately, if you see the line here on the left in this vegetative map, you can see it no matter what view you're looking at these NDVI or these aerial images, it stands out. Over here, you see these little, I don't know, the dark green. All that is a low ground in the field. So you'd expect that to look better when you're dry, right? Because it holds more moisture. But on the left-hand side, there's really no topography change there at all. So after we pulled the samples, so the grower or the agronomist that went out there and looked, one of the things he said when he got back, he said, it's just a wall of green when I walk in and out of that area. So the left-hand side is of course, that area I'm talking about on the left-hand side of the map. And as they're walking through that, he says when he walked from there out of this area, it was just desolate. He said that the temperature, the canopy was warmer, everything was burnt up. And you can see in this image that it's still showing stress on the left-hand side, but much less stress than there on the right-hand side. So as he pulls these samples, the first thing that most people would look at, right, is the nutritional aspects of that soil. And again, this is all I've done for the last 20 years is really focused on nutrition. So this is the first thing I'd look at as well. And you look at it in northwest of the house is the stuff that I'm saying the line is to the right-hand side. The left-hand side is actually sod. So that was sod that was broke 3 years ago. On the right-hand side, the 2/3 of this field's been farmed for the last, 10, 12 years. It's had chicken litter on it, a maintenance rate of phosphorus, about 125 pounds of MAP annually. So it should be higher on nutrition, but needless to say, it is all the way across the board. It's higher on nutrition outside of two things. And one is the H3A calcium, which if you've worked with Next Level Ag or Agronomy 365, that's just really explaining the availability of your calcium. So two things that stood out nutritionally was the sulfate and the calcium. But ultimately, what really stands out in this particular soil test is everything that drives biology. Okay, and we'll walk through a few of these things outside of organic matter being higher on the right-hand side of this map versus the left. Everything else that drives biology is actually higher on the sod part, just like you would think, right? This isn't always the case. If you were taking some CRP out, for instance, and it was, somewhat limited on species, you're not going to see this. But native sods typically are always going to be higher in these things that drive biological activity. And I hope to be able to walk through why that is. But water extract organic carbon, you've heard everybody from BW talk about this because we know it's a driving factor as far as if we want to provide food to our biology, right? And the only way our biology is going to stay active is if we provide food. We have to really focus on water extract organic carbon, not so much organic matter. And we got a few slides to explain that. The CN ratio, that's pretty simple. It's just your organic carbon versus your organic nitrogen in your soil. Why is that important? It's important because the wider or the bigger that number becomes, the more diversity our soils can handle as far as biology, whether that's bacteria or whether that's fungi. We just get a wider array or a bigger buffet, you could say, for our biology. So we want to see that wide just simply so we can, again, welcome more species to the table to eat. HT3, what that represents is how active our soils are. So we've been measuring this for close to 10 years now. In reality, what you're measuring is the CO2 that's coming off of that soil in a 24-hour period. And again, the higher that is, the higher the mineralization will become. VAST is a score that we've been looking at for probably 8 years now. There's not a lot of difference there, but again, this northwest of house is, I consider, farmed right. I mean, there's only been 1 or 2 years of tillage, and where I'm at, tillage is tough on us just because we don't get a lot of moisture. So there's not a great deal of difference, but what that's showing you is the aggregate stability of the soil. So the soil structure, right? And then ultimately we've got this SLAN number. And again, we've really talked a ton about SLAN. It's your amino acid profile in your soil. Great for identifying late season plant health, late season nitrogen uptake. Okay, so everything on the sod was higher on the biological side, but everything was lower when it comes to fertility on the biological or on the sod side. And ultimately, it's really this, right? We've talked about this a ton, but for the last 60, 70 years, everybody's been focused on the top left, that chemical portion of your soil. Just in the last 10 years, really, have anybody been talking about the biological side and the physical side? My point, after you seeing the plant health on the left versus the right, should all these pools actually be the same size, right? I personally believe biological trumps the chemical side. The physical and the biological combination truly drives that chemical side. It's not about how many pounds we're going to put in the soil. It's about, can we make it available, and can we, deliver it to the plant in a timely fashion? Oops, sorry. So why is this happening, right? In a native sod system, Again, the picture on the left, native sod up until 3 years ago. The reason why you see these biological functions being higher, again, your water extract organic carbon, your SLAN, things of that nature, is simply because in a native system, we had 50 to 100 species growing on that ground. We'd have a cool season grass, cool season forb, cool season legume, you'd have warm season grasses, etc. Right? What that allowed to happen, it allowed there's something to thrive no matter what the conditions were. Heat, drought, wet, cool, doesn't matter. Something's going to thrive in that system because there's such a diversity of plants. And when something thrives in a system, what it actually does is captures more CO2 from the atmosphere and it creates more sugars. Okay. The more sugars that plant creates, the higher the plant health becomes, the higher the yield potential comes, and the higher the nutritional status of that plant becomes. So everything really is driven by how much sunlight you can capture and how much sugars you can create. And again, in a native sod, we had that. We had all those things happening for us. It's the same reason why, 8 to 10 years ago, we did a diverse pasture study, basically fertilizing grasses. Okay. When we fertilized our native sods, we got very little response outside of that of sulfur. When we fertilized, cool season grasses or warm season grasses, when you segregated them, you could start to see that increase in production, the more fertility we put on it. Well, again, natives don't need that because a healthy soil environment truly produces, it's got so many pounds of fertility out there already. All it really has to do is become available to that plant. And when you have a food source, which again, the food source is the weok, and how you build weok in a soil is having A, organic matter, so your biology can break it down, or B, having a healthy plant where it delivers exudation through its root system, again, capturing sunlight and turning it into sugars and then delivering it into the roots. That's what drives the weok. So when you drive the weok like a native system, you can get by with much less fertility. And that's what we're seeing in this cornfield. And that's what we've been seeing for the last 20 years, basically, in the pastures around here in South Dakota. Ultimately, in today's system, what we've done is we've limited it to a single species, right? And that single species is going to run into a lot more stress. It doesn't like it when it's really cool. It doesn't like it when it's really hot. It doesn't like it when it's really dry. It doesn't like it when it's really wet, right? So we have limited amount of time and growing days to create the same amount of sugars, to create the same amount of food source that's going to drive our biological function. So because of that, that's what we're talking today about Meltdown. Meltdown does some of those things, and I hope I can explain it with Devin's help of why Meltdown can help us reset our system. Basically helps us allow to drive the biological function back into our soils so we can start to see the plant health we're seeing here on the left all the way across the field rather than just in stuff that's been recently broke. So ultimately what we've done, truly, the simplest way to explain it is we have completely stolen the quality of food from our system. And not only did we steal the quality of food, once your quality of food goes down, which again is your water extract organic carbon, you lose other things that drive that system, and oxygen being a big player in that system. If things are starving, for oxygen, they're just not going to be as active. They might be there. When you take a soil test, you might actually see in a PLFA, you might see the species there, but you don't know how active that system is until you look at how much CO2 is being released. And that's why we look at the HT3, because we feel it tells us, how many of our employees are going to go to work. And I really think all of us should be thinking about our bios and our system as employees for our operation. They're the least expensive that we're going to have. All they're asking for is food in return. And our job as growers and agronomists is to make sure that we give them a healthy dose of a great diet. And again, that's diversity. That's a lot of sugars throughout the season. And ultimately, that's the buildup of weok and SLAN in your soil system. So again, what creates that healthy plant on that picture? What actually created it was a healthy soil. I've talked about SLAN. Again, that's your amino acid profile. I just listed a few particular amino acids that are higher in that sod. And again, I explain a little bit here. I don't need to read through them, but what they actually do to help that plant. They help regulate a lot of things, right? Antioxidants, which helps, the production of stress-free plants in reality. Proline, it helps a lot of things, but it definitely helps with water stress. And again, what I mentioned I'm going through right now is a ton of water stress. Glutamine, Again, that's a amino acid that provides a lot. It's a direct nitrogen source to the plant, but it's also important to carry the nitrogen that you've applied throughout the plant and convert it into a protein. Looking at the HT3, again, if we can get biology, and especially if we can create endophytic reactions where basically you're creating such a healthy rhizosphere in that soil system that the biology is delivering all the food and helping with that water efficiency. Because if the biology is delivering food to your system, your plant has to work less. It doesn't have to work as hard to pull that in. So again, a plant drinks its diet, it doesn't eat it. So what that means to us is if that plant is, hungry for phosphorus, hungry for potassium, nitrogen, etc., it's going to pull in a lot more water just to fill its diet or fulfill its nutritional needs. So we're wasting water in a sense if we can't provide the nutrition. So again, when you have higher, healthier soils, what you're seeing is better, water regulation simply because it's not having to waste the water searching for that food. And then again, just to make sure that everybody understands what WEOC is, in my opinion, it's the management of the present, meaning if WEOC is going up, it changes very rapidly. It changes throughout the season. It changes if we did 3 tillage passes in the fall and tested it again. And the reason why is because it's an instant change. Organic matter, I consider that the past. That's the built up total carbon pool of our soil. It's important. It's great for holding things, nutrition, water, etc., but it doesn't drive the system. It doesn't actually drive the biological system. In fact, if after harvest, right, your plant dies, right, and then your microbial activity takes over and starts to break down that material, much like what Meltdown does. It breaks down that material. So that at that time, that material is just organic matter, but it's going to break it into water extracted organic carbon through the biological process. Okay. And as that biology consumes some of this food source, actually what you're doing in that sense is creating enzymes. And enzymes are a huge driver of creating availability of NPK, et cetera, throughout our soils. This is some university data. I've showed this a lot, but in reality, what this is doing is showing, the old-fashioned way of looking at the potential of a soil was looking at organic matter. Okay, everybody thought the higher the organic matter, the better functionality of my soil. Well, we've seen for a long, long time that that's just not the case. It's very hard to predict nitrogen release, perhaps, just because of organic matter, because there's a lot of other things going on. We might have a high magnesium soil, right? That just doesn't have oxygen in it. If it doesn't have oxygen in it, you're not going to get the mineralization, even if there's a ton of organic N in that organic matter. So what these charts are showing you is if you measure your biology activity, basically that's the key to understanding mineralization. So in other words, you can have as much organic matter as you'd like in that field, but if you can't create availability of the nitrogen through the mineralization or the biological activity of that soil, you're basically wasting some of that potential of that organic matter. And again, this Penn State data, I've had this for, I don't know, a lot of years here, but it's really eye-opening. What this is truly doing is showing you the mineralization rates or the nitrogen release of that soil. And it compares it to organic matter on the right, which you can see the R value is very, very low at a 0.34. And then it looks at, the CO2 or the HT3 number of that soil, and it shows a R value of 0.90. So very consistent. If you can create activity of your biology, you're going to create more free nitrogen. And it's not just nitrogen that you're creating availability of. It's phosphorus, it's iron. Basically it's a run of everything in our soil system. So if we focus on this, and that's the reason I wanted to start with that sod, slide. If we focus on this, everything else that I educate or I spend my day on nutrition becomes easier for that grower to maintain and to make happen within that plant system. And ultimately, the reason this last slide worked, like, again, I showed you the nitrogen release rate. Ultimately, the reason that works is because we created more WEOC. So what this slide is just showing you is again, WEOC to microbial activity has a very great correlation, an R value of 0.83. If you look at microbial activity versus pure organic matter, you've got an R value of 0.43. So what is that telling you? That's telling you that organic matter is great, but if we don't have enzymes and we don't have microbial activity to break down that organic matter into better food sources, we don't have the diversity to create a lot of activity in our soils. We might have a few, biology families that are working for us, but we want to open the door so everybody can come to work for us, right? And the only way that's going to happen is if we provide a better food source, a more diverse food source, which again is your water extract organic carbon. If you only take away one thing from this entire thing, I really want you to focus on, if we create food source, and if we have a balanced soil with fertility and pH and oxygen, everything else becomes, a lot less work for you and I to manage, because the biology is wanting to do this for us, right? And the reason it wants to do it for us is because truly it knows that if it hangs around our root system, it's going to get fed. Because again, our root system of our plants are delivering exudates, and those exudates are made up of water extract organic carbons, or sugars. And again, our biology thrives on sugars. So it wants to be in that rhizosphere. We want it to be in that rhizosphere. And how to start that process is basically allowing there to be food so we can keep that biology active. So again, what drives mineralization? In my opinion, oxygen is first, right? You have to have oxygen, otherwise you're going to be limited to what biology is going to live there. Secondly is food source. And again, in our soil test, we look at water extracted organic carbon, and then again, the amino acids. They're going to feed on both of those. We hope to provide enough water extract organic carbon that our bacteria and fungi don't have to consume all of our amino acids, because our amino acids our plants can consume as well. And I'd rather have our plants consuming those, because in my opinion, that's the simplest way to feed that plant nitrogen late season. Again, balanced pH is important. If you've got a pH of 5, if you've got a pH of 8, you're going to really limit what biology can thrive in that situation. And of course, moisture, right? We were in North Dakota the last few days, talked a lot about, why do things take longer in a dry environment? Because again, moisture is part of that equation. Moisture is part of the equation of activating the native biology in our soils. And ultimately, if we can create more biology, right? If we can create the activity and more biology, and we provide more water extract organic carbon, so we can keep that process humming 12 months of the year, or 8 months of the year if you're in a frozen tundra, basically what our goal is to create more enzymes. And again, enzymes are just proteins, okay? But the only way they're created is through a living organism. So again, you could have carbon out there, but if you're not going to have the active biology, you're actually not going to create the enzymes. And the importance of the enzymes, in my opinion, is everything. That should be your goal. Your goal should be create as many of these enzymes as possible, because that's what cycles our fertility system. Okay. And what I mean by that is, you could put, again, go back to my situation where I show you northwest of the house versus the sod piece. I've applied a lot of phosphorus out there. But yet in my plant, I have less phosphorus in the northwest of house than I do the sod. The reason that's happening is because I've got way more enzymatic activity in my sod. And the reason for that is because I had a better food source, more biological activity. So when we apply that, let's just call it $100 worth of phosphorus, within 21, 28 days, some soils 7 or 8 days, you're going to start to convert some of that plant available phosphorus that you applied, and it's going to go back into these other pools. It's going to get tied to carbon, or it's going to get tied to aluminum or iron or calcium, right? Phosphorus is always going to get picked on. It's going to get tied up. The only way we're going to break that free is A, start with biological activity in a food source, and B, ultimately it's the enzymes that are going to break that free and make it available. So when I talk about regenerating soils, that's a big, word anymore, regeneration. It starts with a healthy soil, right? We just said that, but in all reality, it's both. A healthy plant maintains that. You can have a healthy soil, and I'm going to explain this the best I can, but I'm going to go back to that sod. At one point, the rest of that field was sod, right? Not everything was farmed here in South Dakota 20 years ago. In fact, that was newly broken about 15 years ago. My point is because we've taken some of the plant health out, because we've had, again, we had native species where something thrived every day of the year. Now we've limited it to a monoculture. If you're not stimulating that plant, you're not maximizing every day of that plant's life by making it happy and healthy, we eventually are going to lose some of our food source, because again, you're capturing less sunlight and you're capturing less creation of that sugars day to day. So ultimately, if we can create a healthy plant, what we can do is extend what that sod does for us, right? We can extend it. We're not depleting it nearly as quickly. And this is a process. This is a process that starts with, again, healthy plants, but ultimately, can we break that healthy plant down into food sources for the next crop and for the biology underneath its feet? So we talk about this a lot when we're talking about creating a healthy plant. We mentioned to you that, it's a big process, a huge energy expense to that plant when you take nitrate up. So when you apply, 28%, for instance, and that breaks down to nitrate, ultimately that plant wants that nitrate to convert it to a protein. So it's a long process to get there, a huge energy expense. And we talk a lot about, hey, maybe you should use urea late in the year, ammonium late in the year, because it's a less energy expense to that plant. Why do we care? Because if we don't waste energy, we store more energy. If we store more energy, we create more bushels than the neighbor can. That's the way it is. The more sugars we can produce, the higher the ultimate yield is for that plant. And then ultimately, the higher the yield and the higher the sugar is, the more it's going to share through its exudation process, through its root system, to allow for better biological activity. Because again, those sugars are going to be a food source for our biology. Now, after harvest, what happens, right? We've been creating protein all year if we did it right. Well, we're going to put this Meltdown out there, right? And it's going to allow us to break down what we've built all season long in protein back from them stalks and the leaves. This product is going to help break that protein back into amino acids, which ultimately is going to show up in your soil test as WEON, water extract organic nitrogen, and SLAN. Not only are we going to accomplish that, we're also going to accomplish breaking down the organic matter, like we talked to earlier, which is the large pool of carbon, back into usable plant food, okay, which is WEOC. So you can get pretty excited pretty quickly when you think about what we're after here in the fall. It's basically to prime the system. It's basically to recycle all the hard work we did all year and to allow that to work for us for the next years. So I mentioned earlier, again, what made that green plant healthy yet at this point in time? It's simple. It's HT3, it's your SLAN, it's your C-end ratio, it's your WEOC, and ultimately it's your calcium. The calcium, and the reason why we pair calcium with Meltdown is simply because we know that calcium is a big ball out there. Okay, that molecule's big. When we put that in the soil, what it truly provides is more oxygen, more pore space. A lot of our soils truly are limited in available calcium simply because we've pushed so much nitrogen to create the yields we're after that we've leached out and pushed down our calcium. And when we push that down, we get to have a magnesium dominant soil. And when you have a magnesium dominant soil, we lose oxygen, we lose rooting depth. And if we start to lose those things, we lose a great ability to fix nitrogen, to release phosphorus, because we don't have the opportunity to create the enzymes that we've been talking about. Ultimately, it's all about this, right? Ultimately, it's about, we have to feed that plant, because again, a healthy plant drives a healthy soil, and then vice versa. That healthy soil is going to help the next crop. So we talk a lot about, stimulating that crop. The entire reason why we can apply something like, I know this isn't in the webinar, but a foliar like a full sun, right? Why we do that is to stimulate the crop to create sugar production. For instance, full sun has no phosphorus, but you always like to see 2 to 3 weeks later, you'll see phosphorus come up. Sometimes 7 or 8 days later, you see phosphorus come up. Why does that happen? Is because this bottom picture, we've created an exudation of food source. And then what we've done is allowed, our cheapest employees, again, our bacteria, to start this process where they're not only mining the phosphorus for us, they're actually, again, they're mining it through the enzymatic process that they create, but they're also delivering it to our crop. So I think about it like this: we can Y drop, we can foliar feed, we can side dress, we can fertigate, we can do all these things. But if we just do a better job of managing, our food sources for our biology, they can do a lot of that driving or that delivery system for us. And I believe that we have to treat our biology much like we do an employee or a piece of equipment. You have to maintain it. You have to maintain it. You have 5, 6 pieces of equipment to deliver your fertility needs. And you're maintaining it all season long, right? We have to maintain our biology all season long. And just like, it's winter wheat season coming up for us. So if people have their drills in the shop, they're working on these drills, getting it ready for it. The same thing's going to happen for us. We have to start thinking about our biology like that. It's time to maintain and prime our biology so we can start that mineralization process as soon as possible when the season hits. When the season ends, we should be thinking about next year. And again, if we're not thinking about next year, we're going to lose some of the big opportunities that the biology truly can deliver to your farm. So again, this slide, it's not all just chemical, right? You can apply as many pounds as you want. I've got hundreds and hundreds of examples of where I've got guys with extremely high soil fertility, but they have extremely low biological and physical presence in their soil. And ultimately what that means is we just don't see the uptake. Don't just manage the NP&K, which I think is very important. That's been my job for 20 years. I believe in it. I know it's important to create a healthy plant, but there's more to it. Let's think about our delivery system. Let's think about how long can we keep those things available? Because again, it's not about how many pounds we put in the soil. It's about how many pounds we can create the availability of. So I'm going to hand this over to Devin. Devin, again, has worked with Meltdown, worked with BW. He's got extensive knowledge on this. He's actually utilized this on his own farm, and I'm excited to hear his experiences.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So, Meltdown, the way that I look at it, the way that we look at it on our home farm, for us, it's this Meltdown starts the system that builds a foundation for everything we're trying to do within the growing season to maximize the crop's potential. So in the fall, we're starting, we're getting ready to start corn harvest probably here in 2 months. And, the day that combine's done, that's when we start our preparation for next season. And our preparation doesn't start with anything other than Meltdown due to the sole fact that it starts that biological system that Jason's been talking about that drives these nutrients late season, that gives us this nutrition that allows us to have a healthy crop, to have this system in place that truly works for us. I feel like a lot of times we have a soil where, we try to work for it, where when we utilize biology and we do the things, we've done the things in the past to set ourselves up for success. And now it's time to let our biology work for us. Let our soils work for us. Let them help you to achieve your goals. So, in the beginning, when we started using Meltdown, Biodyne came to us and wanted us to try it on our corn stubble. It was a biological. It was 2013, 2014. Snake oil was the only thing that we could think about. And that's kind of what we thought of it until we did some trials. I'd been running the bean planter, and through the years leading up to it, every time we ran over these corn stalks, I felt like I was going to pop a tire. And I remember vividly calling my old man saying, hey, if we don't address this, we're going to start popping tires. And he didn't have he said, we just don't have a solution. We're just going to have to deal with it. And, the whole time we knew there had to be something, but we couldn't figure it out. So the first year, Biodyne comes to us, we apply Meltdown, and my dad we don't do any fall tillage. We were all no-till beans, but we oftentimes would go out and try to work in wet holes with our John Deere field finisher. And so he sprays half this field, doesn't tell me, sends me across it. And, I've got this field finisher, and this thing just is plugging full of corn stalks. Everybody's been there. Everybody knows how frustrating it is. You set it down, you go 10 feet, you're filled. You make a circle, shake it all out, try it again. And, this process continued as I'm just getting more frustrated as we head across there. And then finally, I get to a line where I hit it, and the sound was different. Everything flowed through that finisher. I called Dad and I said, this is going through, like butter now. What'd you do? And he goes, well, where was the line at? I told him. And he goes, all right, pick it up, bring it back to the house. Wouldn't tell me what he did. Didn't give me any information, which if you know him, that's not too surprising. But I get back up to the house and I was like, yeah, Dad, what was that? He goes, oh, that was, where this Biodyne treatment was. So from that point forward, I was immediately in. If I knew I could go and work in these ruts, work in these waterways, and didn't have to plug up my finisher every time, for me, that was a huge value add. Obviously I didn't pay the bills, but just from a farming standpoint. And so then we go back out there a couple weeks later with the drill, and we're planting with 1560 John Deere drill. And once again, the sound's totally different. The stalks are hitting my tires, they're blowing apart, the disc is just flowing right through them. And from that point, it was like, okay, we have something. There was less hairpinning. We had more consistent stands. We saw it as primarily a fall option only because we knew we had to get it on in the fall to get those stocks broke down, to start that process. So when we came back in the spring, planning was a lot easier for me. Well, the thing we didn't know was, that we could only quantify the things we saw in the fall. This was only a fall option. But as things have evolved and we adopted soil and tissue testing, we got to know Agronomy 365. We only knew, a very, very small part of that story. And, what we didn't know was that these microbes, and I think of it as a chain, a long chain that, combine chain, whatever. And every time you take out a link, you have a smaller section. Well, essentially, that's what our microbes are doing. They're taking those links out. They're making smaller, simple carbons that essentially turn into WEOC. And as we have used Meltdown through the years, a lot of people that we work with as a company and even on our own farm, they talk about year 3. Year 3 is when I really started to notice this biology really had an impact on our farm. Well, what is it? Well, that was the time where you had your system working, you were starting to rejuvenate your soils, you were getting that earthy smell back, you were starting to return it to more of a normal state. But at the end of the day, what you were really doing was you were building your WEOCs. Your WEOCs were continuing to increase. You were adding that carbon to your system that it didn't have prior. And at that point in time, that's when you start to see it. That's when you walk on it and it feels different. Your flocculation is different. When we pair Meltdown with Humical, that's when we see that flocculation, that soil structure just really start to change because we have that calcium piece in, we have more oxygen, which is twofold. Our calcium gives us more oxygen, which also means our microbes have a better environment for them to live in. And we do all of these things to simply just improve the situation in which we put our microbes in. As we do it, as we put these in consistently better systems, they continue to perform at higher and higher levels. And we've continued to see that over the last few years, not only on our own farm, but with the BW customers and the folks that were using Biodyne even before that. So here's a little bit of data from Mason Claude, one of our agronomists in Iowa. And so this was a little bit of a trial he did with the competitors' products versus BW system. And then, down here he has CRP. So he took this out of CRP. He did this trial. You can see the line. But, what's truly cool to look at this and see is, okay, so he has a 15 bushel split here, but what happened here? Well, he broke CRP. And as Jason talked about, just with this fallow, we talk about taking your farm row back, your farm row back to your fence row. When you take out a fence row, man, we love that crop. That crop looks beautiful. It's great. Well, it's the same thing right here with the CRP. But at the end of the day, what does it go back to? It goes back to the carbon. It goes back to that biological system that's found a way to thrive on its own with native species who just go do what they do. That is exactly what we're trying to do with Meltdown, is to take our soils back to those native stages and back to a place where those soils can simply thrive without having to do everything else to them to get out of it what we need to. So we look here, higher yielding corn, higher yielding beans. 223, 208, 256. Over here, soybeans follow that exact same data line, 101 bushel soybeans. As we continue, so here was his soil results on that same farm, looking at his WEOC and looking at his HT3, where he had his CRP way higher, where he had his HT3, both of those are higher. And this trend line follows the exact same line, which correlates back to the exact same things that we were talking about with Jason in terms of building those WEOCs, increasing your HT3, allowing your crop to work for you at a much higher level. So BW's impacts on HT3 and WEOC, this is some more trial information, but this was untreated, this was Biocast Plus, so this was with the addition of Meltdown, the WEOC, major increase over the untreated, same with the HT3. And as we go through this, I know some of you are probably sitting there extremely skeptical. And the one thing I will, encourage you to do is test it. Start using Agronomy 365, start to understand what these numbers mean and test Meltdown, test it to see if you see these things, because it's truly powerful once you start to understand them and understand what these moves mean after you apply these products. So here's our multiple year meltdown study, the Bent Hubert trial out in Iowa. So it's 4 years corn on corn. This was the year of the derecho in 2020. But you can see this blue here is just meltdown by itself, the yield data versus the untreated. And then you can look across there. And the one thing specifically is understanding how and where meltdown fits into your operation. If you're looking at it from just the yield perspective, I'm not saying you won't have any yield, but that shouldn't be the reason you do this. You should use meltdown to start the system, to build the foundation, to be able to capitalize on things that happen late season that allow you to have higher yields, raise your potential. Don't necessarily just look at this and say, hey, this is going to be a 5 bushel response, because we don't know. But what we do know is if we do these things and we apply our biology, that we have a higher potential later in the season to capitalize on the opportunities, that Mother Nature gives us, that the other things we do within the season offer. So how does this all happen? 30 strains of diverse microbes, each with individual tasks that Dr. Farley and the team at Biodyne have put together and determined, these groups at these levels are where we need to be. They're specifically made. We understand what they do. We know what their capabilities are. We have the charts if you'd like to see them. They're very heavy in cellulose, lignin, and chitin degraders. So what does that mean? So that thick starch where you go out there in the spring and you're trying to break them apart and you can't even get that stalk to budge, that's your cellulose, lignin, and chitin holding that stalk together from everything you did the previous year that's stuck in that corn crop. So what are we trying to do is allow our waxy degraders to go and eat on the outside, to allow the cellulose, lignin, and chitin degraders to get into that starch and start to break it apart and just soften it up. The more holes that they can poke in there, the more air, wind, and water that can penetrate through it, the more success that we're going to have. So long chain carbons, like I said, this is like taking your chain for your combine and taking every link out, and you went from one long chain to really small ones. Those are your water extractable organic carbon, your simple carbon that your soils can utilize. Releases nutrients back into the soil. As we utilize these microbes and the enzymes, we continue to break down nutrients, release them back into the soil, speed up that natural degradation process. Instead of having fodder lay over for years after that crop's harvested, try to speed that up, get that soil back into, or get the fodder back into the soil and get that system running. And the other thing it does is it increases your microbial diversity with positive beneficial microbes. So it's not just increasing all of your diversity within your soil, but it's increasing your beneficial microbial diversity within your soil to help try to keep away negative pests and things like that. So what are the best practices? This is, a big one. There's a lot of different ways we can go here. I really look at it as a good, better, best. Our best option would be to take our microbes with water only, put them in water, 6.2 to 6.8 pH, and follow that combine as closely as we can, capitalize on those starches. However, I know, like I said, I farm at home. I realize that that's not always possible. We can't always, just run one pass of bugs right behind the combine because there's other things that play into it. We get busy. We also, in the fall, we utilize herbicides. So we are not afraid to spray a burn down. But if we do that, spray your burn down, spray your microbes with it. Make sure microbes last. And, if it's 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever after that timing is, that's fine. Just make sure that you put those microbes in last. And then the good option that we have would be, so if it gets super late into the season, we're going to spray a herbicide. We haven't had time. As long as we have 48 to 72 hours straight of daytime temps above 40 degrees, I'd be more than willing to spray it. We've sprayed this button up to Thanksgiving almost. Saw a window, went and sprayed it, and still saw the results we wanted to see. But just realize that those could be skewed. If we get super, super cold at night, our microbes want to slow down. If we get super warm during the day, we can still have those big times where our microbes are reproducing, they're getting going, they're getting established. So the best option would be just meltdown of water, The better option would be, or the better option would be with the herbicide. 2-3 weeks after the combine rolls, and the good option would be as long as we have 48 to 72 hours straight of daytime temps of 40 degrees, feel free to use it. Also, a 32-ounce rate. We get a lot of questions about tillage. So what should I do with my tillage practices if I'm going to use Meltdown? So if you're going to apply Meltdown, allow 7 to 10 days, let those microbes really get established, let them build their numbers, and then go through and do the tillage you want to. Or you can follow your tillage pass with Meltdown. Now, if you're chiseling or something, I don't want you out there breaking your teeth trying to get this Meltdown on. But if you can get it on there, following your tillage pass with Meltdown, letting that sit all winter without being untouched, that's certainly a good option. Jason, what I miss here? Where are we?
I don't think you've missed much here, but really, we haven't even talked too much about the plantability. But that's the other thing. We have a high-speed planter. Don't ever run it really high speed, maybe 7 or 8 mile an hour. But needless to say, one of the things that tells me when to slow down is my good ride, right? That good ride percent on these monitors. That's another thing to think about. Something that I didn't do a good job of talking about that I think is vital is again, when you create more carbon, what you're actually creating is a chelation for your nutrients. So when you're applying nutrients in the fall and you have more carbon, the opportunity that gives you as a grower is that you're encapsulating that nutrient and basically taking an inorganic nutrient back to a organic nutrient. Why is that valuable to you? It's simply that, hey, you can utilize an organic nutrient. A plant can utilize that by bacteria breaking it back down. It's the best way to store a nutrient because it's not leachable. It's not going to tie up, again, if it's phosphorus with your iron, aluminum, calcium, because it's got a bond. Much like if, there's products out there now that sell you in your Y drop, right? They sell you a fertility source tied to carbon. We can do that naturally in our system if we just allow our biology to do the work, right? If we just focus more on the biology, a lot of these chelation processes can happen naturally, which ultimately gives us a healthier crop because we can deliver that food whenever that plant needs it. Outside of that, thank you guys.
For Mark, just really quick. So we have a little bit of time. Obviously, appreciate Jason and Devin with their presentation. We have some questions we're going to go through. If you guys have additional questions, please put those in the Q&A. We'll get to that for sure. I do want to make sure that you guys know, we look at this as a partnership. It's an educational piece for us, but we also want to make it easy for you guys, right? We have chat available through here. If you guys put your name, even if you just say, hey, I'm Josh, and I just put my name in the chat. We can have one of our RBMs follow up with you if you have more questions about Meltdown or anything else related to BW Fusion. If you want to text with us, just scan that QR code and you'll get enrolled in our text program. We also have email, obviously, sales@bwfusion.com. But we really are here to educate, come along with as a partner to try to help you improve that profitability going into this new year. So feel free to contact us any way you guys want. But I'll open it up to our agronomy team. We have Jason, we have Bodie, we have Buck and Sean and Devin. And all these guys are on the webinar right now. So if you guys have questions or anything like that, we have a couple minutes to kind of get those answered.
I see a question just popped up. It says, how well will Meltdown perform in excess mag soils? This is a great opportunity to just, again, bring back the advantage to pairing it with Humical. If I've got a lower pH or if I have a high mag or high sodium soil, I think, to truly make it work or to maximize its ability, we need to provide the oxygen. And there's no single nutrient out there that provides oxygen to our soil like calcium does, again, because of its size and its displacement opportunity. And again, the other thing that you're getting when you add Humical is WEOC, right? WEOC is carbon, and you're getting that with the humic and the fulvic fractions in that product. So that helps that kickstarts the process, right? If you can put carbon out on top of your residue to allow, again, the smaller microbes that like a smaller CN ratio diet, they're going to attack that because they want that food. Okay, so it's not only adding carbon to your soil, but it's actually adding carbon as a food source to the material that you're wanting to break down. So again, that high mag soils, if I had that, I truly wouldn't run just Meltdown alone. I'd potentially add either Humical or look at Prime, just simply because I believe you need the oxygen in that profile to allow this thing to maximize itself. Another question is Prime better off applied in the spring and the fall? Again, it really depends on a lot of things, right? Prime was created for the spring because again, it's to prime that system. Very similar attributes. There are some things that are different about it. If I had my choice, I would stick with Meltdown and run Humical with it in the fall. I think there's more power there. And again, you're getting more carbon with that combination than you're going to get with Humical. And I think that's the reason why it segregates itself over Prime in the fall. Nothing wrong with Prime. It's just, again, you're going to get more true carbon, more true calcium in the fall with a Meltdown paired with Humical.
Jason too, and I think the other thing is that I didn't talk about a ton too, but really it's just finding the value in your operation of when you want to utilize this Meltdown Prime stuff. You know, if you're really looking for the plantability, for that degradation of residue, fall's 100% the option. If you're looking for a product that's just going to recycle nutrients, give you that extra carbon in season, and do those things as we have a growing crop, then spring is a fantastic option to be able to do all of those things. But you as a grower have to kind of look at your operation and see where this hole is and where it fits best, because not everybody's going to be going after the residue management, those kinds of pieces. Some people are really going to need that carbon cycling, that phosphorus cycling, those kinds of things in the spring when that crop's living and growing. So it's really crucial that you just kind of understand where this product fits, because it doesn't fit for every operation in the fall and it doesn't fit every operation in the spring.
That's a great answer, Devin. Just think something to add to that. You know, there's certain soils that we'll ask as an agronomist, we'll say, can you apply this in the spring? We don't want it applied in the fall. There's some phosphorus, for instance, or potassium that we're worried about tying up. So you're saying to yourself, well, why would we want to release these nutritional elements of our soil in the fall if you're asking us not to apply, NP and K in the fall? The best answer to that is two. One, there are some soils that Prime's just a better fit because it's not going to hold it. Okay. There's not enough carbon there to hold it, or there's a lot of antagonistic effects, really low pH or really high pH. But ultimately, the reason this is different than applying MAP or DAP in the fall is simply the fact that we're creating, again, organic nutrition. Okay. Because in how we're doing that is we're adding carbon, A, B, we're creating more carbon. So as we create more carbon and we apply our MAP or DAP, what we're doing again is chelating that nutrition. So it can't tie up as easy. So it is different. I just want to make sure I point that out. I've had 2 text messages on that since we started this. People ask, why in the heck would you want to free up fertility in the fall? You told me not to apply it in the fall. Well, the difference is when it's biologically driven, you can encapsulate that and protect that nutrient and keep it more available to the following crop than if you're just applying MAP, DAP, potassium, etc. There's a question on here on shelf life. Maybe somebody else wants to jump in on that. I don't have the answer for that. Bodie, if you're on, potentially you can answer.
I mean, Jason, they said when fall applying manure can be added in the tanker, or is this not a good option? So when you do like the manure side of it in the fall, is that a good option?
Yeah, I think it's a great option, truthfully, because again, and it depends on the manure. A lot of our manure, if it's bed pack, for instance, you got a lot of carbon in there. You're going to want to cycle that raw carbon back into WEOC. If it's potentially, heavy slurry, right, that's very rich in nutrition, this soil is all about balancing, right? It doesn't matter if it's nutrition or if you're balancing your high rates of fertility with carbon. Everything's a balance. So the higher fertility out there, the higher carbon amount that needs to be there. So I actually would want to do it in the fall simply so I can break down the organic matter into carbon so I could chelate and hold some of those nutritional elements that you're applying with that manure.
So do you suggest applying Meltdown Humical before or after litter application in the fall?
I would do it after all day if I had the option. I really would. And again, every area is going to be a little different. If I was in a extremely dry environment, I don't think there's anything wrong with the, the quick Selford and then the biology before the tillage. In some of these areas that you're going to, incorporate things very deeply, maybe in, Minnesota where they're going to plow something or go 8-10 inches deep, then you're better off doing the tillage and following it by the biological application, right? So everything's going to, really come back to your area and what best suits you.
Hey, Josh, on the shelf life question, I would say as long as it's not froze, as long as it doesn't freeze and it's not in direct sunlight. So as long as it's in a cool place where it's not getting beat up by the sunlight and it doesn't freeze, I would say you can extend that shelf life out to almost a year. The other thing I will say is if you're concerned about it, send in a sample to the lab, whether it's in Fort Wayne or Fonda. And let those Biodyne folks look at it and they'll tell you where your counts are, what you need to do. And typically there's not a whole lot of adjustments that need to be made, but as long as it doesn't freeze and it's not sitting in the direct sun all day, I would say you're looking at least a year, if not farther.
Appreciate it, guys. Well, I think that's it for today, man. I really appreciate all you guys coming out. I appreciate Jason and Devin. You guys did a fantastic job. We'll have this webinar once it gets rendered. We'll put together an email, kind of follow up and recap. But like I said, we have the email sales@BW Fusion, contact our RBMs. You can text us, and we will definitely follow up with you. I know right now we're pushing some Meltdown, but at the same time, it is about a partnership. It's about education. If you have more questions, if you need additional data, or if you anything related to your crop fertility programs going into it. We're there to come alongside you as a partner and do this together and show you what we've learned and continue to educate. So we're excited. If you have any questions, like I said, contact us, and we look forward to seeing you out there.